everyone. Welcome back to Tobey's Talk Show. This is episode number 21, and today we have a very special guest. I am here on the show with Jonathan Macri. Jonathan is the dean of the Knicks Film School, host of the KFS podcast, and is a writer for the Knicks Sports Illustrated, Odds Checkers, and The Step Back. Jonathan, I am so excited to have you on the show. I am a Knicks fan. So I'm very excited to speak with you today. You are a huge inspiration of mine as I want to go into the sports industry when I'm older. Jonathan, like I said, it is amazing to have you on the show.
It's a pleasure to be on. I'm as I know we'll talk about. It's like everything's been put on pause with the pandemic. So these little bits of time to kind of distract myself and maybe distract some other people are, I think, welcome and needed. So happy to chat for a little bit.
Thank you. So today on the schedule, what we are going to do is I'll ask you a few questions just so everyone can get to know you a little bit, and then since we are both Knicks fans and you do write about the Knicks constantly, we'll just have some things to talk about the Knicks, as there always seems to be topics to discuss with the Knicks. So my first question for you is right now we're in the middle of a pandemic, and so I was curious to see, as someone that works in the sports industry, how has your day-to-day schedule changed? So what did your schedule look like before COVID-19 happened, and what does your schedule look like right now as we are in the middle of the pandemic?
So I guess my answer is going to be quite a bit different from your typical Knicks beat reporters like Ian Begley and Mark Berman and Steph Bondy and guys like that, and that that's obviously their full-time job. I have been doing the Knicks Film School newsletter for whatever it's been, over a year now, and the podcast, and then obviously covering games for SI Knicks. But that's all kind of that it's never been my full-time employment up until this point. Maybe someday it will be. We'll see. But for now, it's basically my entire life has taken a 180, because I was always trying to beg, borrow, and steal minutes to do all that stuff in. Whether it was writing a newsletter on the train, or staying up until 11:30 midnight recording a podcast after a game or something. Now there's no basketball, so it's like there's a lot more flexibility. I still my full-time work is as a teacher, and obviously I'm not doing that anymore because it's all the teaching is remote, and that has kind of lessened. So for me, the answer is pretty simple. I've become, a full-time dad in the course of this pandemic, which has been a wonderful thing, because my daughter's 3.5 years old, and I could spend more time with her. But just as far as sports are concerned, it's weird to not have any sports to watch. It's like, aside from basketball, like the Masters was like a huge thing. Like, we just passed the weekend that was supposed to be on. It wasn't on. And obviously the tournament, got canceled, and now it's like, so baseball and all this stuff. And I guess the toughest part for me is kind of just not knowing. Like, if somebody was like, okay, hoops is going to get started again in the middle of July, and there's going to be a condensed off season, and this is when the draft is going to be. And it's like, okay, you plan accordingly based on what you're told. But right now we haven't been told anything. So I think probably the not knowing has been the toughest part for me.
Right, because it seems like you get a report. It's like, okay, basketball, like fans are allowed in the stadiums in 18 months, and then you get something where it's like the NBA is trying to resume in 3 weeks. So I think no one really knows right now. I think that's going to be the case for a while. I don't think everyone's going to have a set. Especially the NBA. I don't think they're going to have a set schedule for a while. I think everyone is still a little confused with what's going on. When is this going to end? And with my schedule, obviously school has been changed, but like my every night, 7:38 watching basketball games, especially the Knicks, that's tough to miss out on every day. But it's been a month already, and I'm getting through it. So, I'm trying.
As are we all.
Yes. So my next question for you is that I see you went to Fordham University. So I was curious as to how your career started in the sports industry. Were you taking specific classes in college? Did you get like an internship right after college? What is your journey like?
So, couple things. For one, I am what the young kids refer to as old. I'm gonna be 37 in. Oh my goodness, I'm gonna be 37 in like 3 weeks. And it's funny because when I was in high school, which is a million years ago, but like we had a sports publication in my high school, and I wrote for it all the time. I remember I did a couple basketball articles and stuff, and I loved it. But I guess back then the internet was in its infancy, and it was like if you were going to write about or broadcast about sports, I at the time at least had this notion like, okay, well those jobs are not realistic jobs. Those are not jobs that I would ever be able to get. So I'm not even going to think about it, even though I enjoyed very much writing about sports back then. And to answer your question, whether I ever got like internships in college or anything, it was the furthest thing from my mind, just because, again, not to repeat myself, but I just didn't think it was realistic. And my career I bartended, I went to law school, I practiced law for 5 years, and then ultimately ended up in teaching. And then as a teacher, I found that at least coming from the practice of law, I had a lot more time on my hands than I was used to. And because of where I was teaching and where I lived, I also had 2 hours to kill on the train every day. So I said, all right, well, I have to fill this time with something. I always enjoyed writing, as I said. So I just started writing again, and I was like, well, what am I going to write about? Write about the one thing I'm truly passionate about, which is basketball, and oftentimes the Knicks. And it just kind of got started there. And I submitted some of my stuff to like a fan-sided blog. They accepted it. I started writing for them, and then one thing led to another. You meet people on the internet, and I guess if like my big thing for me was I've always been very active on Twitter. I know that sounds funny because Twitter has kind of become like I don't know how young people think of Twitter, but like it's a unique animal, and it could be really frustrating and really annoying. And there are times where you just want to like take a step back and be like, all right, I'm going to get off of here for a few years. But I always found it to be the easiest way to get my stuff read by as many people as possible. And quite frankly, it was the only way that I knew how. But it was great because I just, kind of gradually built up a following, and one thing led to another, and now, doing what I'm doing here.
I mean, like that's very interesting because I've spoken to Frank Isola and Mike Borkunov, and like just how different all the journeys are so interesting. Because some people go like they know like me, or at least hopefully I get into the sports industry when I'm older. But like some people know like when they're young, like look, this is what I have a passion for. And
For sure.
there's some people like you who didn't know until they were older and had spare time. So
or knew and just didn't have the guts to go for it. And it's like kind of embarrassing to say, but at the same time, it's like everybody has to take their own journey.
And so you kind of answered my last personal question for you already. So my question for you was, did you focus your career, or at least your sports like career, around the Knicks because you were a fan of them? And is that the sole reason? Because you were a big fan of the Knicks, you were like, okay, this is my passion, or was there something else?
So I've always been a Knicks fan
Right.
since I was 9 years old. It's when I started following the team. But I think more than that, and I think it's an important distinction for me personally, is I feel like there are a lot of Knicks fans. Not that this is a bad thing. That it just is that they just care about the Knicks, and they don't really care about the greater context of the NBA. And to me, the NBA was always like, I've always like I followed baseball on the periphery, and like I'm always in like fantasy football leagues, and I pay attention to the NFL. the NBA has always been something that I have just been obsessed over. And even the years when the Knicks were bad, in the early parts of this century, and they were almost unwatchable, I just found the league as a whole to be fascinating. Just because, for whatever reason, it always clicked with me in terms of how people thought when they analyzed the league, when they, people who worked in the league, like moves that were made, trades that were done between teams. It's like, all right, I get that. I may not agree with it, but I get it. So it was always kind of natural for me to write about it and just think about it more deeply, because I think a lot of fans don't maybe always want to think about their teams that they wrote for all too much. It's supposed to, it's fandom. It's supposed to be enjoyable. Not if you've been a Knicks fan for the last 20 years, but that's besides the point. But I guess the point is, it's like, all right, just put a good product on the floor. I want to watch it and root for them. It was never like that for me. I was always about thinking about like the next move or what's the next step or things along those lines. So, to write about it and to write about it in depth and, God, I've shortened it of late, but I used to write pieces that were like 2, 3, 4,000 words long. It was insanity. But for me, it made sense because that's how my mind works. So, yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I mean, I always ask myself, like, I understand, like, my dad brought me into it, but like I have an out. Like, I could like go join another team. I just think it's like I put so much time and energy into like the Knicks and like focusing on every single thing that's going on. Like, the G League. Like, I could like name 5 players from the G League just because I'm like, bring these guys up. I just feel like when you're so like invested in a team, it's like you can't let go of it. It's like, you put so much care into them, and like even though they might be like bad, at least for me, it's like I've been so invested, and like you just want to see them succeed. So I think that's why I've been sticking around.
The funniest thing for me, and I don't know, maybe if the team wasn't good, because I grew up, obviously I started watching in '93. They were in the playoffs every year for the first 8, 9 years I watched the team. Maybe if that wasn't the case, this would be different. But like the funniest things I see on Twitter when, like Net fans will make fun of Knicks fans and they'll say like, "Oh my God, the people that choose to root for this team." And to me, listen, there's a million and one things you criticize the Knicks for and their fans for, if I'm being honest. Choosing to root for the team never made sense to me, because it's like, I'm honest. Like if I had a choice to maybe not root for this team, I might think about it. But it's not a choice. It's in my blood. And if I'm ever lucky enough to even cover them or cover the sport full time, I just can't imagine there ever not being that part of me that just wants them to win. So,
well, at least you got to see them go to the finals twice.
I did get to see that. I wrote about it yesterday. Actually, today.
I kind of remember seeing them in the playoffs against the Pacers. So, you got 2 finals. I have very little memory of the playoffs. So,
you got to play. You got one playoff series win.
I just need one playoffs. I've been waiting 7 years for just one more playoffs, but
I know
you got to wait a while. So my first question about the Knicks for you is, I've been thinking about this for the past few days. So the Kristaps Porzingis trade was definitely an interesting one. I remember I was in class. It was last period, and I had my phone next to me, and there was no news with Kristaps until I think like 2:40ish, and all of a sudden it said like maybe he wanted out. And then I remember getting out of class and he was traded, and I was like, what? And so now as we look back on that trade, we could see the Knicks definitely messed up, at least value-wise. So when you look back at that Kristaps trade, I was curious about your first reaction to the trade, and how you could see the Knicks using what they got from it in the future, and your thoughts on it now.
Yeah, well, the first thing I have to say is your experience was kind of like mine. My train home leaves out of Atlantic Terminal, Brooklyn, every day, and there's a period where you go underground and you have no cell service. So when I went underground, Kristaps was still a Knick, and when I came out from underneath, he was no longer a Knick. I thought, like a lot of people thought, like there were people at the time who were like, "Oh, they must have a guarantee from somebody that they're coming, whether it was Durant or someone else. I never thought they had any kind of guarantee. I never thought that there was some kind of an under the table handshake deal. I thought that they had reliable information, or reliable enough information that they felt comfortable making the trade. And even after this summer kind of, well, let me take a step back. Even after Durant signed, I guess, with the Nets, like the thing that changed once Durant signed with the Nets, and some people will say the thing that changed once Durant tore his Achilles, although personally I think that didn't change the result. That's just me. At that moment, once he didn't come here and take their cap space, they lost the trade. And people get annoyed when I say that now, because they're like, oh, well, there's still the cap flexibility. Tim Hardaway Jr.'s salary would have been on the books for another year. We don't know how KP's going to age, his injury situation on that contract, and we don't know where the Mavs pick's going to. Okay, all that's well and good. That trade was a trade for cap space. Right. The other stuff was extra. Once that cap space didn't go towards the thing that they made the trade for it to go towards, the trade is a loss. Might it still work out for them in a way that, who knows? Maybe they pick 30th in the 2023 draft, and that's Dallas's pick, and they end up drafting the next Jimmy Butler. Who the hell knows? Anything could happen. But they lost the trade, and at the same time, I was still, for a while, defending them for making it, because I said they went on the intel that they had at the time, and it was what everybody was saying, which is that Durant's going to come with somebody. And I think where my thinking has changed over the last several months on that is, I don't think at the time I could wrap my mind around just how, what's the most polite way to put this? Just how woefully outmatched their front office truly was. And I think they heard what they wanted to hear, and they used it as an excuse to take the easy way out, because the one thing I do have absolutely no doubt in is that they wanted to get rid of him as much as he wanted to get out of here. And I think that informed how vigorously they went about repairing the relationship. And I think they didn't, quite frankly, like the idea of him throwing his weight around and his brother doing whatever his brother was doing, and then the injury happened, and that obviously, complicated things all that much further. I guess the thing maybe I'll always wonder is, fine, the relationship is beyond repair. I would have been okay with trading him, but if they had done their due diligence and not felt more comfortable, or not felt as comfortable in the fact that the cap space was going to go where they thought it was going to go, I would have been curious to see what other young player, aside from obviously Dennis Smith Jr., who was a guy that Dallas couldn't wait to get rid of. I would have been curious to see what the best young player they could have gotten in the trade was if they didn't prioritize the cap space, right. Which wouldn't have been that insane, because the other thing, and again, nobody talks about this, but the reality of the NBA right now, and it has been this way for a few years, is if a guy wants to come to your team, he's going to come to your team. And sure, that might mean trading a future pick to open up the room, like we saw. Obviously, the Clippers moved heaven and earth to get Paul George and, in turn, Kawhi Leonard this summer. Those trades happen if the guy that wants to come to your team wants it to happen badly enough. Right. So looking back, a more competent front office would have been like, you know what? If KD wants to come here, whatever we have to do, we'll trade the picks. And at that point, you don't mind it, because your future is kind of set up, because the guy actually comes. So, yeah, they bumbled that. I'm not going to say as badly as you could bumble it, because they, we'll see what happens with the picks. And again, whatever. But, they screwed it up. I don't know what else to say, how else to put it. They screwed it up.
Well, I mean, so from my point of view, what I saw was how I looked at it is, look, you're not gonna trade Kristaps, and you're gonna be like, okay, we're doing this for cap space. You're also gonna get something in return. So I was confused by the return we got. DeAndre Jordan, I knew we weren't gonna keep. Same with Wesley Matthews. So pretty much in return for Kristaps, besides DeAndre, those were just cap fillers. and just for them to clear cap. We got 2 first-round picks, 1 protected, and Dennis Smith Jr., which I don't even think is a fair deal for a rising superstar. Sure, he was hurt, but I thought, like you said, they could have done their due diligence, maybe even looked around more, because it seemed like it was pretty instant. It seemed like, because I remember we played the Mavericks. We played the Mavericks. The last game
The night
before he was
before,
traded
yeah.
was the Mavericks. So
And
obviously,
DSJ had the triple double, and again, it's like, look, if you would have told me like that, or after the trade got made, like they made the trade because the kid had a great game in MSG right before the night before, I'd be like, you're nuts. They would never do something that short sighted. And again, now looking back at, and I don't know what else to put it, just like how much the Emperor's new clothes were actually exposed over the course of the last 6 months with this front office, or now ex front office because Mills is gone. It's like nothing would truly shock me. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I like you said, if I got told that, like, if I could get a shot at Kevin, like a good shot, it seemed like we had a good shot at getting him. It wasn't like out of the blue. It wasn't like James Dolan was just saying this stuff to get us like riled up. Like, there were news rumors from all around the NBA that were saying, these people were looking at the Knicks. So I mean, sure, like it's risky. But like if I had the shot to get a Kevin Durant Kyrie pair in New York City, especially when we've been so bad for the past 20 years, I mean, I would take it if it ended up being a Kristaps for Dennis Smith Jr. and a protected first, and then I think the next year's first is unprotected.
The 2021 pick is the unprotected one, and it just so, and look, it's fortuitous that that's going to be a good draft. And hey, listen, the West is tough. All it takes is like one, badly twisted ankle from like KP or Doncic, and all of a sudden, Dallas is maybe around a 500 team. But
I mean,
the fact that like you're sitting and now it's like the best outcome for that trade hinges on maybe the Mavericks being like barely a lottery team. That's not
right.
And again, this is not, and this is where people get confused. They hear me talk about the trade in this way, and they're like, "How could you say that?" Kristaps Porzingis is signed to almost $30 million a year. He hasn't shown he can finish a season yet. He clearly is. He's at that height. He's going to have injury problems. I get all of that, but that's a separate issue.
Right.
The fact is, his value around the league was such that there were a lot of teams that could not wait to get their hands on this guy, and they chose to prioritize one thing, cap space, in that trade, which is why I said again, it's like, and look, I'm not saying the deal would have been there, but like, I'll always wonder, would the Clippers have maybe decided, you know what, yeah, we'll put Shai Gilgeous-Alexander on the table. They probably wouldn't have, because they had their own designs on Kawhi Leonard, but you never know.
Right.
Or even like, I don't know, Sacramento with Marvin Bagley. Again,
Right.
would they have done that? Who knows? But those are different caliber of prospects than Dennis Smith Jr. And I feel bad being hard on Dennis Smith Jr. But again, that's a thing where it's, if the Knicks had done their homework, or even just paid attention to the news once he went AWOL because he didn't like the fact that he wasn't getting the ball anymore. But again, it's a separate issue. It's like you would have known that,
Right.
and they didn't do that homework, unfortunately.
So now I want to get into the free agency. So after we didn't get Kevin Durant and Kyrie, I was talking to Frank Isola about this. He was very disappointed in what we did. I don't know what your thoughts are. Obviously we're looking back on the season, and we could say whatever we want. But obviously the signings didn't work out. I think at least that once we realized we weren't getting Kevin Durant and Kyrie, 5 o'clock Kevin Durant announced it, 6 o'clock started free agency. I think we started to scramble, and I think what happened was that we were just trying to get as many vets as possible to try to get as many wins as possible. That's what I thought happened. I thought, as a team, we were like, look, if we're not going to get these guys and be like, okay, we have to wait a year for Kevin Durant, we could be bad one more year, we got to go all in and try to get some wins. And I think that's what we tried to do, even though it didn't work out. So I was curious about your thoughts on kind of how free agency went after we knew we weren't getting Kyrie. We knew we weren't going to get for a few weeks beforehand because he signed with Rock Nation. All the pieces were lining up with Kyrie. Kevin Durant, no one really knew until he really announced he was signed by the Nets. But I was curious about your thoughts on kind of how free agency went after we didn't sign those players.
Yeah, for me, I think the the opportunity cost part of it that bothers me is less about guys that we didn't sign,
Mm-hmm.
because like I personally don't want Tobias Harris on his
Right.
contract. I mean, I know this is going to sound crazy, but like I don't want Kemba Walker on his contract.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just trying to think of like some of the other guys that would have potentially they could have given big deals to. It's like none of those guys are all that appealing to me. Um, for me, it was more the fact that they did not have the forethought to be like, we just drafted a kid in RJ Barrett who right now, because he doesn't have a reliable jump shot, needs the ball in his hands. And we're not going to be very good this year, whether we make the playoffs or not. They're not competing for anything. There's never going to be a better time to put the ball in this kid's hands and just let him learn on the fly than this season. And to a lesser extent, the same thing could be said about Frank Ntilikina, Dennis Smith Jr. even, and really the guy who really got shafted more than anyone, because RJ still got a fair amount of touches, was Kevin Knox. Who you talk about a guy who his drop in touches was literally unprecedented in the history of the NBA for a first year player to go from where he was in terms of usage, minutes, shots, everything, year one to year two, where it was not an injury related situation. So they had this situation with all these young guys, and then who did they bring in? All guys that need the ball to be effective. Julius Randle needs the ball. Marcus Morris needs the ball. Alfred Payton, because again he can't hit a shot outside of 10 feet, needs the ball to be effective. Bobby Portis, again, show me a big man who likes and wants the ball as much as Bobby Portis. You're not going to be able to. So they brought on all these guys that need the ball and that really took away opportunities from their kids. And, people say like, oh, they didn't get enough shooting. They went with too much size. Like, there's different types of size. And like, even if you had played Bobby Portis more at the 5, that would have even worked out better. And like, they got shooters, they got Bullock, they got Ellington, but it was just too many guys that were essentially guaranteed playing
Right.
time that need the ball to be effective. And it just completely torpedoed so much of what should have been happening on the developmental end for the season. And then, you throw in the fact that they had a coach who was supposed to make this jigsaw puzzle work in Fizz, who like that's not his bag.
Right.
Fizz has some very specific things that he's good at. Trying to make a bunch of mismatched puzzle pieces look good, that ain't one of them. So, but at the same time, it's like that's the part that bothers me. Not that we like didn't sign somebody else with that cap space. Although, am I really gonna get bothered over the fact that they didn't take on the Mo Harkless salary dump? Like, whatever. Sure, there's a possibility that Golden State 2025 pick, whatever the hell it is, that won that deal is going to be good. But I don't get bothered as much as the fact that it would have been a nice year to just give the kids more of the reins and let them see what they could do. So that was where my disappointment came in.
Well, I agree. So, I mean, I've talked about in the past several times about this season. Even there have been rumors with players getting upset at Julius Randle for his famous spin that turns into a turnover, or him having the ball in his hands too long. There have been rumors about people being upset on the team about that. And obviously, us Knicks fans who watch every night and we see the same thing every night, we understand. It's frustrating. We sign these guys, and the whole point of drafting young guys is to let them progress and let them get experience on the floor. And
Yes.
like you said, when you sign 7, I think it was 7 or 8 or 9, 7, 8,
It was
9.
7. It was 7 total. When you add in Marcus Morris, yeah.
Okay, so 7. Once you sign 7 guys, that's a starting lineup plus 2 bench spots, and then you have Frank Ntilikina, Damian Dotson, Alonzo Trier, Knox, Mitchell Robinson, and RJ Barrett. 6 guys young that need the ball. And as many NBA fans know, you can't play 13 guys in the NBA. It's not going to work out. A, your game plan is going to be really hard to figure out, and B, there's just not enough minutes to give those guys if you're trying to win a
And,
basketball game.
and I'll just like add in, like, again, I defended some of those moves at the time because I'm like, well, clearly they know that, or they think, not know, they think that this is going to be the type of culture, this is going to develop a type of culture where competition is going to bring out the best in everybody. But in order for that to work, if someone is not giving their best, then you have to pull them and you have to be comfortable doing that. And that was the part that never happened. It's like, you know, when Bobby Portis monopolizes 3 straight possessions with ridiculous post ups, he wasn't really getting pulled from the game. He would get his same 20 or 25 minutes the next night. When Julius Randle was pulling everything that Julius Randle pulled for a lot of the year, he wasn't, taking a seat on the bench in the fourth quarter. He was still out there. And you know what? Because again, at the end of the day, their priority wasn't about building a culture. Their priority was sneaking into the playoffs to save their jobs, which is why they kept playing Julius Randle despite the fact that he didn't always care to defend his position or any position for that matter. Because he was, despite all those flaws, the best player on the team. And if you want to try to win games, you got to give him the ball. So it just, from top to bottom, it was not well thought out. Like the first thing you said, it was, crap, we have a lot of money to spend. We got to spend it somewhere. And it just wasn't a well thought out plan.
But what I don't even understand even further is, okay, we're at game whatever. Let's say we're at game 43, right? We started the year 4-20, so we pretty much knew since the 24th game that the playoffs were a no-go, right? After Fizz was fired when we were 4-20. We were done, right? You can't come back from that. It's very hard too. If you do, I think the Heat almost did that a few years ago, but it's very hard to come back from like that big of a deficit. But what I don't understand is, okay, now so let's say you keep trying. Let's say you're like, okay, Fizz is done. Maybe Mike Miller can make us to the playoffs, right? Now we're at game 60. We're done, right? Now, like, we know. We're pretty much done. We're like 5th, 6th in the lottery. Like, there's no hope. Why are you still starting Taj Gibson? Why are you still starting Mo Harkless? I just don't understand. Like, my thought, what I've always thought, and maybe this is just me being a Knicks fan being hopeful that this is the reason, maybe just being hopeful that our front office isn't that clueless, is that Mike Miller, this is what I am thinking of, this is the only way that this makes sense to me, is that Mike Miller knows, because obviously Steve Stout, whatever First Take, and everyone knows when you get a new president, there most likely is a new general manager / coach. That's what usually happens. The president comes in and he makes his own moves because now it's his pretty much team. Okay. So what I think is that Mike Miller, as long as every other Knicks fan knows, he most likely won't be the head coach. He could still be back on as an assistant, maybe defensive, because he was a very good defensive coach. He helped our defensive ratings a lot. But Mike Miller knew that he wasn't coming back and is saying, look, I'm just going to help boost my resume as much as I can. And that makes sense, and you can't blame him if he is doing that. If he's saying, okay, I'm going to try to get to a 500, because we started obviously 4-20. I'm going to try to get to a 500 record as a coach and say, look, if teams are looking for coaches, look, I brought the Knicks who were 4-20 and I gave them a 500 record as a coach myself. And you can understand that, but I think that's when the front office kind of has to step in and go, look, Mike, it's game 60. I understand. They're obviously not going to tell him, look, I understand you might be getting fired soon. But I think they all know what's going on, and you have to say, look, the season's pretty much over. Now it's time to insert Mitchell Robinson into the lineup for Taj Gibson. Insert a Kevin Knox into a Mo Harkless role. Insert Frank Ntilikina in for Payton. Because also you have to remember, these guys are all on one-year deals. They're not even going to be here next year. So it's not like you're hurting their feelings. They're all gone next year. The only person that might be back next year, I believe, is Julius Randle. But he might be traded too. So next year we might have 0 people from last summer back on our team. So I don't even understand why people like Taj Gibson are still starting.
It was pretty simple to me. It's like I'll dip into what little I remember from law school briefly. Like, you probably heard the term manslaughter as opposed to murder. The difference is manslaughter is when you kill someone by accident. Murder is when you intend to. The first 24 games of the season, that was manslaughter. Right. Like, they tried to put together a playoff squad. They did their best. They screwed up. They murdered. The season was dead. Everything that happened from about, Even you want to give Mike Miller a grace period to see if they could run off 8, 9, 10 wins in a row or whatever, 8 out of 10 or something that miraculously gets you back into the playoff race. Fine. I'll even give them to game, let's say, 35 or 40. Everything that happened from that point on, that was willful, intentional, 100% murder because it was Mills for a little bit, and then even after Mills got fired, it was Scott Perry. That wasn't Mike Miller going rogue. Mike Miller admitted in press conferences that him and Perry talked, and they decided together the approach. And he was very transparent about the fact that, look, we're trying to win games. That's all we're trying to do. There's nothing more to it than that. And I got a couple, some of the games that I covered, maybe not some of them, all of the games that I covered, I always found a way to ask Miller, either before or after the game, something about playing the young guys. And he got annoyed a few times at me because he clearly didn't want to be asked the question anymore. And I don't blame him because, again, he's not the one making that decision. That is a Scott Perry. Well, at one point, it was Scott Perry and Steve Mills. And then once Mills got fired, it was a Scott Perry decision to keep just playing to win games and not factor anything else in. And that's, quite frankly, it's inexcusable. And that's why there's a lot of, fans out there who are like, so what's the worst thing if Scott Perry stays on, as the GM or, even if he's in some other prominent role. I'm like, put aside the summer and the fact that whether he was an implicit bystander or he was an active participant, he was one of the two guys at the helm. So I don't know how he could get off scot-free. But even if you want to put everything that happened this summer on Steve Mills, which, again, how that makes Scott Perry more effective because he couldn't prevent that is a different story. But once Mills got fired and, the very next day, things didn't change in terms of what you're asking about, like lineups and minutes and all that stuff, is inexcusable. It was absurd. And I didn't even bother yelling and screaming about it after these games because I'm like, what's the point? It's not going to change anything. Right. So yeah, that was frustrating. That said, at the end of the day, RJ got his minutes. Mitch got his minutes. I know he wasn't starting, but he got his minutes. Even Frank, he averaged 20 minutes a game. Would I've liked to see him? Would I have liked to see a lot of different things about the lineups that they would have adjusted? Yeah, I would have. But, it didn't happen. I hope that this goes down as a 1-year blip on the radar and it didn't do, irreparable damage to, some of the guys. Not to say that anybody's guaranteed to be here for a long time, but I think of some of these guys definitely there's a chance.
Right. I mean, I don't think Mike Miller's a bad guy or anything. And obviously, if you're going to go for wins right now, I mean, maybe a Wayne Allen Billick is a better player than Kevin Knox. He most likely is, and if that makes sense, if that's what you think, then of course you're going to play those guys. But I think obviously Mike Miller's been put in a tough situation. Obviously, there have been major things that have happened, and Mike Miller's been the guy to speak about it. Obviously, our front office has been everywhere, and they haven't spoken since November. So you have to give, obviously Mike Miller a lot of credit for stepping up to the plate and kind of being the voice of New York for a while, as no one else decided to speak up. But I mean, yeah. And so I think my last question for you is: we are getting closer and maybe farther when they release the draft date, but we are getting closer to the NBA draft. And so I was curious. I've been asking a few Knicks writers this. Obviously, point guard is a big need for us. But let's say we stay at number 6. Let's say the lottery doesn't go our way, good or bad, and we end at 6. Would you like to see the Knicks draft the best player available or the best point guard available?
I think it's a good question. I'm going to cheat and say best player available, but with a caveat, which is that I want no part of James Wiseman, just because there are a few things that I hold near and dear to my heart when I think about team building and the asset management of building an NBA team. And one of them is just maximize your assets. And if they drafted Wiseman, it would be a signal to the entire league, essentially, that, like, okay, we're going to trade Mitchell Robinson. Or we're going to draft Wiseman and turn around and trade him. Right. Which would be tricky because it's like, a draft pick. It's like a new car. It loses whatever percent of its value the minute you take it off the lot. So I don't want him. I'm a big fan of Okongwu, and I think Okongwu is, like, in a lot of ways, maybe the safest bet of the draft, because it's like that guy is going to have a defined role at the next level. He's going to be a role man who could switch on defense. Maybe he has more passing in him, like, could be like a Bam Adebayo light. Even him, though, it's like, again, that guy's a center at the next level, and but you could get away with that. Yeah. So yeah, other than Wiseman, I would say go best player available. But again, it's like you have to trust their evaluations. Like, I could see them being super, super, super high on Toppin, on Obi, and because that guy's he might walk into the league and average 20 a game next year. Right. Doesn't mean he's, like, ever going to be helpful to a team winning. I don't know. Might he be, like, the quote unquote best player? It depends on what your priorities are. Are you trying to make a splash so that you look good next year with the guy that you picked? As opposed to, like, Killian Hayes, there's he may not look very good next year. Right. But again, this all has to take into consideration, like, what are Leon Rose's priorities? Mm-hmm. How much confidence does he have in the ability to just, like, make the best decisions and, like, not worry about the ramifications? That's why, for as much crap as he gets retrospectively, Phil Jackson, say this about the man, till his last day, he was making decisions that he thought were the best decisions for the franchise, long term. Like, he never did anything to try to save his job. They weren't always good decisions. Some of them were quite bad, but he did that. I think we'll see, and I'm not trying to say that Leon Rose is not going to do that, and I think if anybody has a long runway, it's going to be the guy that, like, James Dolan has clearly trusted and listened to because of the relationship with CAA for years and years and years, so I'm very hopeful where that's concerned. But I also don't know, again, how much of a premium is going to be placed on the Knicks looking coherent and competitive next year.
So, I mean, I agree. I actually think it's very interesting that, because I forgot that this is going to be Leon Rose's first draft with the Knicks. So this is a big pick because, obviously, like we were just talking about, you could go two different ways. Because obviously our need pretty much is a lot of different things, but our big need, what we've been needing for a while now, is like a point guard that could lead the team, but that could also open up the floor for both Mitch and RJ, right? So Killian Hayes, I really like. I think he could be someone that could be a very good passer when he gets older. Obviously, there's been LaMelo talks. Cole Anthony is different because he's not as great as a passer as LaMelo and Killian Hayes, but he's definitely more aggressive and maybe a better scorer than Killian Hayes. So for Leon Rose, I think there's a lot of different ways he could look at it this year. You could go for a point guard that passes. You could go for the best point guard overall. You could go for the best player. So, I mean, I think it's very interesting because I think we have RJ, so you're not going to draft really a shooting guard. You could draft a point guard / shooting guard and move one of them around. But you have RJ there, and you're going to have Mitch there. I hope they don't trade him in the near future. Hopefully they don't have thoughts about that. So I think, they could go power forward. I think they're going to trade Randall. Maybe go for Christian Wood. That's my thought. I'm not sure. Hopefully that's what we do, or maybe trade for Markkanen. So I think, point guard, small forward, power forward are kind of the spots they'll most likely look at. I think they'll really focus towards point guard just because, we've been needing like a focal point guard for a while. And I mean, I think really point guard is the best option for us just so we can open up that floor. Because if you could get that pick and roll game, right? So when you have Elfrid Payton doing a pick and roll, the point guard is not going to be scared to put a hand up in Payton's face because he can't, like we said, he's not the greatest shooter. If you have a point guard that could shoot, that could be a lot more deadly with the pick and roll because then the two defenders have to focus on both Mitchell Robinson and then the point guard either shooting or driving. So that's three things that could happen on that play compared to two if you have a point guard that can't really shoot. And then
Yep.
opening up the floor, if you have a point guard that is a great passer that looks for, because I've seen on so many plays RJ leaving his hands up in the air waiting.
We all have.
Right. So if you get a point guard that is someone that is very good at passing and can find the man always, look, that could help RJ's development greatly. So I think this pick is going to be very interesting because it's going to be, are you going to focus on what could help the young guys in general? Are you going to focus on what could help the team, as in getting like a franchise player? Doesn't matter the position. So I think it's going to be very interesting. Because also the draft is very different this year, right? We have to remember this is Leon Rose's first draft, but you're not going to really have these combines and these face-to-face conversations.
Yeah.
So it's going to be very different this year. It's going to be also very interesting to see what happens.
I'm looking forward to it. I'm excited for it. Nothing would shock me. Wouldn't shock me if they traded the pick. Wouldn't shock me if they. My prediction is that they will draft the point guard. I would be very. If they kept the pick, I would be utterly floored if they did not end up with a point guard.
Right.
But yeah. I also. I'll say this. I think they will bring in a veteran point guard. Unless they end up with LaMelo Ball, which maybe that might complicate things, I'd be really surprised if they didn't go into next season with a point guard starting on game one that was not currently on the team. Right. That would be my prediction.
And also, I mean, the draft lottery is still a thing. Obviously, at number 6, you most likely won't get LaMelo Ball, but you could also trade up. So there's a lot of things that could happen either in the lottery, draft day, before draft day. So we don't know. But yeah, Jonathan, that's really all I have to talk about today. Thank you so much for coming on once again. This was a great conversation.
Yeah, no, thank you. Like I said, I'm thankful for the distraction. Yeah. I'm gonna go back to running around and chasing my daughter as she is on an. She has a limitless battery, so she keeps me young, as it were. But yeah, no, I appreciate you having me on for a few minutes, and yeah, I'm looking forward to talking again sometime again.
Of course. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Have a great day.
You too, man. Be well.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Hey guys, so if you made it to this far in the video, first of all, I would like to say thank you for listening to those 47 minutes of me and Jonathan talking. And as you can see, I'm wearing a hat. These are definitely not for sale. These are just some cool hats that I wanted to see if they would look good. Let me know what you guys think down below if you guys are still here. Maybe you guys will see me wearing these in the next few videos. And I just want to say thank you guys so much for the support on all the guest videos I have done in the past few weeks. They have all done amazing. They are my best videos yet. And I spend a lot of time working on them, so it means a lot that you guys show the support that you do. Expect more guest videos in the future. We may have a break, like a week break. I don't know yet. But thank you guys for watching once again. Expect a new video next week, and I will see you guys next time. Bye, guys.